Scotland's Story. From cigarette cards issued by the Stephen Mitchell and Son Tobacco Company 1938. Card 1, The Roman Invasion AD 78–85. Agricola, the brilliant Roman soldier and statesman, was governor of Britain from AD 78–85. During this time the people were successfully reconciled to Roman rule, and they adopted the customs and dress of the conquerors. Agricola subdued the warlike advances of North Wales and then advanced northwards against the Caledonians. After establishing a line of forts between the Clyde and the Forth and sending his fleets round the coast, the Roman general defeated the Caledonians under Galgucus in a battle at Mons Graupius or Grampius, which has given its name to the Grampian Hills. Card 2, Picts and Scots at a Roman Wall. AD 300. Throughout the period of the Roman occupation of Britain the Picts were constantly attacking from the north. In the 4th century these tattooed warriors were joined by Scots from Ireland, who settled in large numbers on the western coast near Lochleven, and who later gave the land its name. Up to the middle of the century these attacks were generally repulsed, but when the Roman power was weakened by the necessity of defending the Saxon shore, the incursions of the Picts and Scots became frequent and terrible. These raiders would return to their mountain retreats laden with the spoil of prosperous Roman settlements. Card 3, St. Columba and the Picts. AD 563. Some little time after the Scots from Ireland, who had settled in Dalriada had been defeated by the Picts, the Irish St. Columba set sail with 12 disciples from his native shore, and landing on the island of Iona, built there a church and monastery. 2 years later Columba crossed to the mainland and converted the kingdom of the northern Picts. Subsequently, the Scots, being then at peace with the Picts, introduced the Irish Christianity to the pagan English invaders whose kingdom extended from the Humber to the Forth, and whose influence was felt as far north as the Grampians. Card 4, The Norsemen invade Scotland, AD 800. In the early days of the 9th century the raids of the Norsemen from Scandinavia were frequent, and the Picts, weakened by this incessant warfare, were conquered by Kenneth MacAlpine, King of the Scots. The country which had been known as Pictland now became Scotland, and during the following century, while the English were preoccupied with the Norse invaders, the kings of Scotland gradually extended their dominions southward over the English-speaking regions, as far as Cumberland and Northumberland. Card 5, Macbeth and the Murderers, 1040. Duncan had been King of Scotland from about 5 years when in a battle near the Moray Firth he was defeated by Thorfinn, the great Norwegian Earl of Orkney and Caithness. Macbeth, who was supported by the powerful clans of Moray and Ross, chose this moment to slay the king and seize the throne. Macbeth was the first Scottish king recorded as a benefactor of the church, but the history of the period is for the most part obscure, as Macbeth is chiefly known as the tragic figure of Shakespeare's play, a scene of which is illustrated. Card 6, Magnus of Norway, 1099. As early as the 8th century the fair-haired and fearless sea rovers of Norway began their raids on Scotland. They took possession of the Shetland and Orkney Islands and the Hebrides, and founded settlements on the west coast. In 1398 Magnus Barford is said to have entered into a treaty by which he was confirmed in the possession of all the islands round which he could sail with rudder shipped. At the Mull of Cantyre his ship was drawn over the narrow strip of land and the Mull became a Norwegian possession. After the Battle of Largs, nearly 200 years later, another Magnus of Norway surrendered all the Scottish islands except Orkney and Shetland. Card 7, The Legend of Holyrood. The legend of Holyrood tells how David, hunting in the forest which covered the land where Edinburgh now stands, was thrown from his horse by a white hart. At this moment of great danger the Holyrood miraculously appeared in the hand of the prostrate king and the great stag fled. The king in gratitude raised an abbey on the spot, and called it Holyrood. Melrose, Dryborough and Kelso abbeys were also built in the time of King David and 5 bishoprics were founded by him. Card 8, The Battle of the Standard, 1138. In support of his son Henry's claim to Northumberland, David I invaded England in 1138. The English king was engaged with his barons in the south, but an army was raised by the aged Archbishop of York, who declared a holy war against the Scots. Deserted by many of his southern allies, the Scottish king was defeated on Cutton Moor near Northallerton in Yorkshire. In this battle the English fought round a standard consisting of the mast of a ship bearing the banners of 3 patron saints. The invaders retired in disorder on Carlisle, and a legate from Rome made peace between the two countries. Card 9, King David I, 1124–1153. Besides his good work for the Church in building abbeys and founding bishoprics, King David applied himself energetically to the reorganization of the administration of justice. He substituted charters to landowners for the customary unwritten Celtic tenure, and in his reign tribal rule gave place to royal authority, justice being administered through the king's court and those of his earls, thanes and sheriffs. The older methods of trial by ordeal or by battle were giving place to trials before sheriffs and juries, with witnesses. It is recorded that even while hunting King David would dismount in order to hear a petition from one of the humblest of his subjects. Card 10, The Battle of Largs, 1263. In 1262, Alexander III on reaching his majority made renewed efforts to reconquer the Western Isles from the Norsemen. His proposals were scornfully rejected by Haakon, King of Norway, who appeared off the west coast the following year at the head of a large fleet. Sailing down the western coast, Haakon anchored near Arran. Negotiations were prolonged by Alexander, and when at last the landing was begun, a storm damaged the Norwegian ships. The battle on the following day left Haakon in a hopeless position and he retired, dying at Orkney on the way home. By the Treaty of Perth in 1266, Scotland regained possession of all the islands except Orkney and Shetland. Card 11, The Victory at Stirling Bridge, 1297. Having driven the English from many of the fortresses in the north, Wallace was engaged in the siege of Dundee when the Earl of Surrey at the head of an English army appeared near Stirling. Wallace marched rapidly southward, and taking up a position near Abbey Craig guarded the bridge over the Forth. On the 11th of September, 1297, the English advanced. When half the army had crossed the bridge, Wallace attacked and completely routed the invaders, continuing the pursuit as far as Berwick. By this victory the English were for a time driven out of Scotland. Card 12, Stirling Castle taken by Edward I, 1304. Edward I lost no time in taking a terrible revenge for the Scottish success at Roslin. In 1303, the lowlands were overrun by his great army and towns and villages were left in smoking ruins. In the following year Stirling Castle, which was held by a small garrison under the gallant Sir William Oliphant, was besieged by the whole English army directed by Edward himself. With the castle in ruins, the brave defenders were at last compelled by famine to surrender, and Edward's second conquest of Scotland was complete. Card 13, Wallace at Westminster, 1305. After taking Stirling Castle, the English king offered rewards for the capture of Sir William Wallace. Many Scottish nobles joined in the pursuit, and the famous warrior was taken and handed over to the English by the Sheriff of Dumbartonshire, who received the reward. Sent to London in chains as a traitor, Wallace was cruelly hanged, and with the shameful death of the great leader whose unwavering patriotism had held together in a common cause the warring factions of his countrymen, all hope of independence seemed to die out. A new leader, however, appeared, who was to lead his country from this dark hour to the glorious victory of Bannockburn. Card 14, The Last March of Edward I, 1307. The great work begun by Wallace was being carried on by Robert Bruce as a guerrilla war in Galloway in 1306. His successes provoked the English king, who once again led his armies into Scotland. Arriving at Carlisle, Edward I was met with news of another defeat of his troops by Bruce. Rising from the litter on which he had been carried, Edward mounted his horse once more. The effort, however, proved too much for the aging king and he died on reaching Borough-on-Sands. His weak successor, Edward II, after a feeble march to Cumnock, returned to London. Card 15, the Battle of Bannockburn, 1314. In a vain endeavour to retain the kingdom won by his father, Edward II mustered a great army of English and Irish. Knights from Hainault, Gascony and Aquitaine joined the English king, who advanced from Berwick in June 1314. Bruce had placed his army in a position defended by the ravine of the Bannockburn, and although vastly superior in numbers and arms, the English could not break through the Scottish spearmen. When Bruce ordered a general advance, the rout of the English was complete, and the king fled to Dunbar, where he took a ship for Berwick. Scotland had asserted her independence in one of the greatest decisive battles of the world. Card 16, Black Agnes, 1337. In the years which followed the disastrous Battle of Halidon Hill, King Edward III frequently invaded and laid waste the lowlands. Notable among the many sieges of these wars was the gallant defence of Dunbar Castle by the Countess of March. Black Agnes, as she was called from her complexion, again and again drove the English besiegers from the castle. She destroyed the engines brought up for battering down the walls, by dropping huge stones from the battlements. At length the castle was relieved by Sir Alexander Ramsay, and the bravery of Black Agnes became a favourite theme in the minstrels' songs of the period. Card 17, King James I at Windsor, 1424. When about 12 years old, the Scottish Prince James was captured by English sailors while on his way to France. He was held to ransom by the English king, and although he became nominally King of Scotland in 1406, he remained in captivity for over 17 years. While in England, James was well educated. He was quick and strong, excelling in all athletic sports, and he became the most accomplished prince of his time. One of the poems written by James, King Esquire, is preserved in the Bodleian Library, Oxford. In 1424, James married Lady Jane Beaufort, and returning to Scotland the same year was crowned at Scone. Card 18, the Bravery of Katherine Doublas, 1437. King James, who had been brought up in captivity in England, returned to his own country in 1424, and at once proceeded to bring to order the lawless confusion prevailing in the Highlands. The king dealt firmly with rebellious nobles, and a period of tranquility ensued. This vigorous policy, however, cost James his life. In 1437 a band of vengeful Highlanders gained entrance to the monastery, assisted by the royal chamberlain, who removed the bolts of the Black Friars at Perth and killed the king. One of the Queen's ladies, Katherine Doublas, heroically endeavoured to keep out the murderers by barring the door with her arm, but her sacrifice was in vain. Card 19, King James II crowned at Holyrood, 1437. Crowned at the age of 7, the young King James passed his childhood amid the warring factions of the great nobles Crichton and Douglas, in their struggles for the power given by the possession of the person of the young king. In 1449 James married Marie of Gueldre and began to assert his royal authority. His reign was marked by much internal strife, and although the king overcame his nobles, much bitterness remained. James was killed by one of his own great siege guns while attacking Roxburgh Castle in the war with England, which had again broken out. Card 20, King James IV in his laboratory, 1490. Like his father James III, James IV was interested in science, and he set up a laboratory at Stirling for the study and practice of alchemy. James IV was one of the most popular of the Scottish kings, tall and handsome, and a fearless rider. He moved freely among all classes of his subjects and proved himself to be a wise and energetic ruler. James, who was also interested in shipbuilding, built and equipped a navy which, under Sir Andrew Wood, cleared the sea of English pirates. Card 21, King James IV and Margaret Tudor, 1503. Although King James IV had supported Perkin Warbeck in his claim to the English throne, Henry VII was inclined to live at peace with his neighbour in the north, and he succeeded in arranging a marriage between his eldest daughter Margaret and the Scottish king. Scotland had prospered under James, and the Scottish court had reached a degree of refinement hitherto unknown. The ceremony took place in August, 1503, at Holyrood, and 100 years later the great-grandson of James and Margaret succeeded to the English throne, thus uniting the crowns of the two kingdoms. Card 22, after Flodden, 1513. The Battle of Flodden was fought when James IV, having crossed the border, encountered the English under the Earl of Surrey. Against the advice of his councillors the Scottish king accepted a challenge to battle, and his army took up a position on Flodden Edge. The English commander then executed a skillful movement by which he brought his army to the rear of the Scots, who were compelled to turn back on their strong position. King James and 30 Scottish peers were among the slain, and there were few families in Scotland which did not mourn the loss of a member in one of the greatest disasters which had ever befallen Scottish arms. Card 23, Mary Queen of Scots entering Edinburgh, 1561. Born in 1542, a few days before the death of her father, James V, the infant Mary was crowned at Stirling in the following year. When 6 years of age, the Queen of Scots was betrothed to the Dauphin of France, and was sent to France to be educated with the royal children at the French court. In 1561, the beautiful young queen, saddened by the early death of her husband who had become King of France, returned to her native country. She landed at Leith on the 19th of August, and a few days later amid much pageantry and popular rejoicing, the Queen made her state entry into the city of Edinburgh. Card 24, John Knox and Mary Queen of Scots, 1561. The great reformer was on many occasions summoned into the presence of Mary Queen of Scots, who bitterly resented the fearless preacher's boldly uttered condemnation of banqueting, dancing and other vanities of the court. On one occasion the Queen, finding herself quite unable to move her opponent from the position he had taken up, burst into tears, and with vehement abuse and threats of vengeance, ordered the preacher from her presence. Knox, referring to the incident, said the chamber boy could scarce get napkins to dry her eyes. Card 25, The Murder of Rizio, 1566. Rising from a bubble position in the choir of the Royal Chapel, David Rizio became the private secretary of Mary Queen of Scots. At the time of her marriage with Darnley, the secretary's influence over the Queen was already considerable. After the fall of the unfortunate Darnley, no attempt was made to conceal the high position occupied by the Italian, who received, or was about to receive, the Great Seal of the office of Chancellor. This rapid rise to power had angered many nobles. Supported by Darnley they seized Rizio, and having dragged him from the presence of the Queen, slew him and threw his mutilated corpse into the courtyard below. Card 26, The Abdication of Mary Queen of Scots, 1567. A little more than a month after her imprudent marriage with the Earl of Bothwell, the Queen found herself alone and a prisoner in the hands of the Confederate army. She was removed by night from the Provost's house at Edinburgh, which had sheltered her from the furious mob, first to Holyrood, and then to the island, fortress of Lochleven. Here, a few days later, came Ruthven, Lindsay, and Mortimer, an act of abdication in favour of her infant son, and another document appointing the Earl of Moray as regent. Card 27, Mary escapes from Lochleven, 1568. Aided by George Douglas and disguised as a laundress, Mary attempted to escape from her island prison of Lochleven in March, 1568. Her white hands betrayed her and the scheme failed. About a month later, however, a younger Douglas helped Mary escape from the castle through a postern to a boat waiting for her. By sunrise she had reached Hamilton Palace, where many nobles rallied to her cause, and her army grew to about 6,000. A few days later at Langside this force was routed by the army of the regent, and Mary flew southward to England and to her long imprisonment, which was to end in tragedy at Fortherange. Card 28, The Assassination of the Regent Moray, 1570. James Stewart, Earl of Moray, had reluctantly accepted the regency on the abdication of his half-sister Mary Queen of Scots, and in 1570 he was negotiating with Queen Elizabeth for the return of Mary as a prisoner to Scotland. In that year, however, he was murdered by Hamilton of Bothwell Hark, chiefly in revenge for private injuries to his family. The assassin, hiding behind a curtained window, carbine in hand, shot the regent as he was leaving Linlithgow. Assisted by his kinsman, the murderer escaped from the gardens at the back of the house and sailed for France. Card 29, Andrew Melville before James VI, 1584. The great Scottish scholar had already reorganised the universities of Glasgow and Aberdeen, and he was engaged in a similar work at St Andrews when trouble arose over an alleged treasonable sermon. Melville, who was summoned before the king and the Privy Council, defended himself with characteristic energy. To escape imprisonment, however, Melville was compelled to fly to England, but in less than 2 years he was again lecturing at St Andrews, where he became rector in 1590. Under Melville, the Scottish universities became famous throughout Europe. Card 30, Mary Stewart led to execution, 1587. In September 1686, Mary Stewart was taken to Fortherange Castle, where during the following month her trial was begun. Mary conducted her own defence with great courage and skill, but with only one dissentient. The commissioners found her guilty of plotting against Elizabeth. After much hesitation and delay, the English queen signed the death warrant of her cousin. The Earls of Shrewsbury and Kent were sent to inform Mary of her fate, and after taking leave of her belongings, among whom she allotted her jewellery, Mary Stewart was led to the block in the Great Hall of Fortherange Castle. Card 31, James VI becomes King of England, 1603. The only son of Mary Queen of Scots was proclaimed King of Scotland in 1567, when little more than 1 year old. About a quarter of a century later, an exhausted and travel-stained messenger, rousing the king from his bed, brought news of the death of Elizabeth, and James was soon on his way to London. Although he promised to visit his native land every 3 years, the king only once returned during the remaining 22 years of his reign. James ardently desired the complete union of England of Scotland, but at this time the project was unfavourably received in both countries. Card 32, Singing at Covenant at Greyfriars, 1638. In 1638, when Charles I and Archbishop Laud were endeavouring to impose the liturgy on the Scottish Church, the National Covenant of 1581 was revived, and at Greyfriars, Edinburgh, many people signed the large parchment laid on a flat tombstone. For many years the Covenant has held sway in Scotland, and although Charles II, when he was crowned at Scone, declared his approval of the Covenants, he renounced them when firmly seated on the throne. The cruel persecution of the Covenanters in the years which followed led to the Pentland Rising and the executions in the Grassmarket. Card 33, The March of the Covenanters, 1640. Charles I refused to issue a warrant for the meeting of the Scottish Parliament, and the members, sitting without a warrant, appointed a committee for the government of the kingdom until the meeting of the next Parliament. The convening army under Leslie marched southward and crossed the border, the preachers marching in front with Bibles in their hands, and the soldiers following with arms reversed. Quietly occupying the 4 northern counties of England, they sent their request to the king, who was pressed by the peers and also petitioned by the citizens of London, was compelled to issue writs for the assembling of the parliaments. Card 34, Montrose in the Mountains, 1645. In the Highlands the clans rallied to the royalist standard, and Montrose, a brilliant leader, he again and again defeated the Covenanters. At last, deserted by his Irish supporters and the Gordons, he was defeated at Philiphorn near Selkirk. Following this defeat of his supporters in Scotland, Charles I, escaping from Oxford, gave himself up to the Scots. From Newcastle Charles was forced to order Montrose to disband the remaining Highlanders, but at the same time he sent secret orders to keep them together. The royalist cause, however, was lost and Montrose fled to Bergen in 1646. Card 35, Montrose in Edinburgh, 1650. In 1649 Montrose was sent by Charles II to the north of Scotland with an army of 1,200 men. 1,000 perished by shipwreck, and the remainder on landing were easily overpowered. Montrose was taken shortly afterwards and he arrived in Edinburgh the day after an Act of Parliament had been passed decreeing his execution. On his way to the toll booth, the prisoner was paraded through the streets bound on a cart which was ordered to halt in front of Moray House. There Argyle and his son Lorne were among the spectators heaping insult on the helpless prisoner. Card 36, Cromwell at Dunbar, 1650. The Scottish army under Leslie was skirmishing with the English forces under Cromwell, when the latter after setting fire to his camp on the Pentland Hills fell back on Dunbar. Although the Scots were twice as strong as the English, Cromwell by a surprise attack at night on the Scottish right wing, gained the victory which made him master of Scotland as far as the Forth. The conquest was soon complete, and for some years Scotland prospered under English rule, the Scottish members sitting at Westminster as in the days of Edward I. This brief union, however, was terminated by the Restoration in 1660. Card 37, Covenanters in the Mountains, 1660. One of the first results of the Restoration in Scotland was the fall of the Presbyterian Crick. The Earl of Middleton, who had been excommunicated, was appointed Lord Commissioner, and he proceeded to destroy all the civil rights of the Kirk, and the Covenants were declared to be unlawful oaths. Argyle suffered at the Maiden. James Guthrie, a leading preacher, was also executed. Hundreds of preachers refusing to recognize the bishop's rule were driven from their pulpits and began preaching in the mountains, where, in spite of a brutal persecution, bands of faithful Covenanters gathered round them. Card 38, The Last Hours of Argyle, 1685. Argyle, whose ill-disciplined army had dispersed, panic-stricken, was himself captured at Inchinnan on the 18th of June. 2 days later he was brought to Edinburgh, and was let through the streets with the hangman walking before him just as his father, 35 years earlier had taken his prisoner, Montrose. On the day of execution he was visited by a Lord of the Council, a former supporter who had changed sides. This man, on finding the Earl peacefully sleeping in his fetters, fled from the castle in shame and remorse. Card 39, Killiecrankie, 1689. Although William had been proclaimed king at Edinburgh, Viscount Dundee succeeded in raising the clans in the cause of the deposed James II. On the approach of Mackay with the government forces, Dundee took up a position on a hill near the pass of Killiecrankie, and held back his Highlanders until the sun was setting. With a wild shout the clans then charged down the hill and in a few moments the battle was won. The brave leader, however, had fallen in the moment of victory. He was supposed to bear a charmed life and it was commonly believed that he was shot with a silver button taken from his own coat. Card 40, The Massacre of Glencoe, 1692. Although Highland chiefs were required to take the oath of allegiance by the 1st of January, 1692, Macian of Glencoe, however, was a few days late in complying and gave his enemies, Dalrymple and Breadalbane, an opportunity for planning and carrying out under the king's warrant the terrible massacre of Glencoe. At 5 o'clock on a dark February morning Campbell of Glenlyon and his soldiers, betraying the hospitality of the clan, began their work. Owing to a military blunder, many of the clan escaped through the unguarded hill passes, before the main body of soldiers arrived to burn down the houses in the desolate valley. Card 41, The Darian Scheme. During the last years of the 17th century commerce began to occupy some of the attention hitherto concentrated on religious questions in Scotland. It was at this time that William Paterson brought forward the plans for a colony at Darien, and a company was formed for the purpose. 2 expeditions set out with the highest hopes, but the survivors of the first had already left the fever-stricken land when the second arrived. Of this second party 300 out of 1,300 had died from disease when the Spaniards compelled the withdrawal from the isthmus. 2 ships were lost at sea and only a few of the survivors of these ill-fated expeditions ever reached home again. Card 42, Raising the Standard of the Old Pretender, 1715. Although opposed by many preachers and patriots, and hampered by Jacobite intrigue, the measures resulting in the Union were carried in 1707, and Scottish peers and commoners took their seats at Westminster. The Jacobites, however, still hoped for the return of the exiled House of Stewart, and in September, 1715, the Earl of Mar raised the standard of James at Kirkmichael. The superstitious Highland chiefs were disturbed on this occasion by the gilt ball falling from the pole as it was planted in the ground. Card 43, Lord Nithsdale escaping from the Tower, 1716. After the ill-fated rebellion of 1715 had come to an end with the furtive flight of the Old Pretender, his chief supporters were impeached and brought before the peers. Among those condemned to death was the famous royalist, the Earl of Nithsdale. King George I refused to receive a petition presented by the wife of the condemned earl, and the resourceful countess planned the rescue of her husband from the Tower. With the assistance of Jacobite friends, the earl, disguised as a woman, was hurried from his cell on the eve of the day fixed for his execution. He subsequently escaped from England. Card 44, The Porteous Riots, 1736. At the execution of a popular smuggler in 1736, some disturbance occurred which gave the hasty captain of the guard an excuse for firing on the crowd. Brought to trial and condemned to death, Captain Porteous was reprieved by Queen Caroline, but a party of armed men in disguise forced their way into the prison at night and dragging their victim forth hanged him by torchlight on a pole outside a house near Hunter's Close. It was said that the leaders were well known, but although rewards were offered for their capture, the secret was kept well, and no one was ever convicted of the crime. Card 45, Bonnie Prince Charlie. 1745. After the disastrous attempt to sail up the Thames in 1744, the cause of the young pretender was abandoned by the French. Charles set out from Saint Nazaire again in July, 1745, only to be driven back to France with the loss of most of his munitions. Undismayed, the champion of the Stuart cause once more sailed for Scotland, and landed with only 7 attendants. The MacDonalds and several of the clans gathered round the handsome young prince, and the ill-fated march southwards began. The Highlanders reached Derby, but bitterly disappointed by the failure of the English Jacobites, Charles turned back, and brilliant rearguard actions enabled the retreating army to reach Scotland. Card 46, The Young Pretender, 1746. After the defeat of the Highlanders on Culloden Moor, Charles left the field, and wandered for months, a fugitive with a price on his head. At South Uist the prince escaped capture only through the devoted loyalty of Flora MacDonald, who, obtaining a pass for herself and her maid, Betty Burke, the name the disguised prince was to assume, succeeded in conveying him to Mougstock, whence he was taken to a safe hiding place. Early in September 2 French vessels arrived of the coast, and Charles escaped to the gay life of Paris. He left behind him a trail of desolation, and prisons full of his unfortunate supporters. Card 47, James Watt and the Steam Engine, 1764. Leaving Scotland at the age of 19, James Watt went to London, where, under the strain of long hours of work and study, his health broke down. He returned to Scotland, and while working as instrument maker to the University of Glasgow, he repaired a model of an early engine. From this time Watt applied himself diligently to his condenser steam engine. In 1768, a fortunate association with Matthew Boulton led to the development of an engine similar in its essential features to steam engines of today. In one of his patents Watt described a steam locomotive, but he did not proceed with the design. Card 48, Burns and his Highland Mary, 1786. In springtime on the banks of the Ayr, Burns met his Highland Mary, Mary Campbell, and the two exchanged Bibles as a token of betrothal. "Will ye go to the Indies, my Mary, and leave old Scotia's shore? Will ye go to the Indies, my Mary, across Atlantic's roar? At this time Burns was thinking of going to the West Indies to seek his fortune, but the untimely death of his Highland lassie brought to an end the romance which inspired the poet to write some of his most exquisite songs. Card 49, The Lost Manuscript of Waverley, 1813. Sir Walter Scott, having written about 7 chapters of Waverley, showed these to a friend whose criticisms induced the novelist to throw the work aside. More than once his thoughts returned to the unfinished romance, but the sheets had been mislaid. Some years later Scott needed some fishing tackle for a guest, and in searching in an old writing desk for lines and flies, found the long-lost manuscript. When this fortunate accident brought the sheets to light, Waverley was completed, and in 1814 was published. Card 50, David Livingstone in the Cotton Factory. The boy who was to become the greatest of African explorers worked in a cotton factory from the age of 10. In these early years he taught himself Latin, and was a keen student of natural history. In 1840 Livingstone obtained the diploma of the Glasgow Faculty of Physicians and Surgeons, and set sail as a missionary for the Cape. His explorations began in 1849, and opened up vast tracts of the Dark Continent. In 3 great journeys Livingstone covered 1/3 of Africa and discovered the Victoria Falls of Zambia, Lake Nyasa and several other lakes.